And it's lights out. Welcome to the Pitwall, your stop for fantasy Formula One content. Welcome to our podcast. I'm your host, Jeanmark, and joining me this evening is my father, Dr. David Kessler, and our amazing friend, Paola. What a crazy race. The British Grand Prix gave us a lot of action, and we're going to review it in our race results and dynamic pricing report. You'll notice on this graphic, due to space, we have only included qualifying and race results. There's no sprint qualifying shown here, but all the points are included. Hamilton got the first position in qualifying. It's not called pole position because that was awarded to Verstappen for the sprint race, but he started in Q1 and he finished in P1 at the end of the race. Same thing with Bottas, Q3, P3. The big oofs this race belong to the two Red Bulls, Verstappen dropping 18 positions and Perez dropping 11 positions over the course of this race weekend. One guy who really excelled over the course of this race weekend was Alonso. Many of you were asking, do I go for Alonso because he could get an extra 10 points with his race streak? Well, he bagged 35 points, and good on you if you saw the potential of that Alpine and you picked up Alonso. Paola, how do you feel about Ocon? This is the first time that he's actually finished in the top 10 since Monaco, 5 whole races ago.
I was really excited to see Ocon up there, finally getting some points, because he's been on one of my teams for a long time, but there's a huge gap between Ocon and Gasly that's 10 million, and there's no amount of day trading that allows me to pick up Gasly instead and still round out my budget. So to see him get some points on my teams was really great.
Which brings us to the discouragement for changing teams. Dad, you used 2 wildcards for 2 of your teams, and you lost out on the day trading. How did that make you feel?
It's one of those lessons learned. I know for next year that you really have to do it at the beginning of the year before people get solidified in what they think people are going to do. However, the second half, I see some changes now. You know, Perez isn't doing as well. So there might be some change in the second half as people who are dominant in the first half might not be so dominant, and people who are started slow might start building up. So maybe I can use my wild card the second half a little more judiciously.
That is true. Most of the movement was after the first and the second race. Last thing we're going to say is an amazing fantasy Formula One community on Reddit. It's called Fantasy F1. A lot of people post on there. That is where you can have good discussion. Here's the post. The lack of volatility on driver and team prices is absolutely killing my interest in this game. And he goes and he talks about some things that are valid points. The main takeaway I said was, imagine all the things that you experiencing this season with the meta, stagnation. It doesn't seem that the prices are going up and down like you want them. Between 2018 and last year, 2020, you didn't even have the cost cap increase or dynamic pricing like we have it this season. And so it was even more stifling. That's why we started doing League DRD. Take the money out of it, take the constructor out of it, and just try to run your team with more strategy involved. Any thoughts, Dad, about how you've seen Fantasy Formula One develop since we started playing it its first year in 2018?
It has developed. It was less engaging when it first came out. I was new to Formula One at that time, but the more you know about fantasy and Formula One, the more it can not be as intriguing.
I remember that first year in 2018, I think Bro never changed his lineup. He just went on autopilot because there was really no reason to. And he actually had a good driver pairing, and so his cap went above 100 million. And neither of us could get the same lineup as him because we were trying to switch out one driver every race. At that time, you couldn't do 6 subs and all that. You could only do a max of 3 subs, period. So we were trying to react every week. We didn't have any statistics or anything to base this all off of. It was just gut instinct. And Bro was like, I'm just going to let it chill. Yeah, he started running away with it because his drivers were just doing really good. But hang in there. We'll continue to improve. Which now brings us to our dynamic pricing report. Last week was the very first time this season that there was absolutely no changes in price value. This week, we saw the movement of Sainz going up by 0.1 and Mercedes going down by 0.1. But Norris was able to get his power streak. Hats off to him. Hamilton and Verstappen and Bottas were able to get their quali streak, and Ferrari was able to get their race streak. Now remember, sprint race qualifying gave you points, and you can check out the video on our channel describing that detail, but it did not impact your quali or your race streaks. Notables that lost their progress was Verstappen.
But on the plus side,
yeah,
if you did use your MD and you still haven't, putting Hamilton as your MD like next week or the week after that would probably be a good idea.
Yeah, let's talk about that. You get one mega driver the first half of the season before the summer break and one mega driver after the summer break, which means next race at Hungary is the last race for the first half of the season. So if you have not used your mega driver, you want to use it next race. Now make sure you're picking a driver that isn't going to get you negative points, or that's triple negative points. And you don't want that. But yes, you want to use it. And then for everyone else, in 2 weeks, you could go again. But I would recommend you wait till you get these power streaks. Dad, of the drivers that you currently see, who are you most wanting to get on your team moving into our next race?
I've been trying to get Fines on my team, and he's getting more consistent. And if I can get him or Leclerc on my team, I think it would be stronger than the Perez that I currently have. I do think it's interesting how the person who won the top had McLaren, so I might have to rethink about my dedication to Red Bull. However, I don't think Verstappen's going to DNF 2 weeks in a row.
Well, that's interesting because at the beginning of the season, I believe that McLaren was a better choice than Red Bull because of some of those inconsistencies Perez was having. Then in Baku, it made sense just to pick up Red Bull. But like you said, if Verstappen isn't going to be DNFing, Red Bull's still the choice. He is going to beat out Norris and Ricciardo. Now, if Ricciardo starts actually getting in the top positions again, and he did it for the first time this season, this last race, then McLaren will be a serious contender.
One thing I've been thinking about is if it's possible to get a 0.4 budget increase within weeks through day trading. I'd love to have, for example, Verstappen, Russell, Leclerc, Norris, and Gasly all together, all the young boys. That would be great. Any thoughts on that?
It kind of goes back to what Dad was saying earlier about how things are like slowing down. 5 races ago, leading up to Monaco, it was my goal to raise by 2 million over the course of 4 races. And I was able to hit that. But that was because there was so much trading up and down every single week. It's going to be much more difficult. But yes, 0.3 or 0.4 is quite feasible. You've got 5 drivers and a constructor. So as long as those 5 drivers are going up in sentiment and then they perform well, you should be fine. But it might be harder now. So what I would recommend is, this is on the summary on the left. And if you were to scroll down, you're going to have a section. Oh, here's a little promo. Our league is sitting second in large leagues. We took a big hit these last 2 races, and so now the gap is roughly 50 points, whereas before it was only less than 10. But we're pressing on. What we're looking for, though, is wildcards played. To put this in perspective, the first race of the season, no wildcards. The second race, 10,000, followed by 9,000, 6,000, 10,000, 6,000, 6,000, 7,000, 4,000, 5,000, and right now we're sitting at 954. So when you get around 10,000 people doing a wildcard, that's when you want to do your wildcard, because that creates the movement necessary to get up your value. So yeah, I would recommend that you watch that. Hopefully, when the new wildcards become available after summer break, you'll be able to get your team up.
Did you already use your wildcard for this half? Yeah.
You did? Yeah. Hello there, Etsy Bitsy. Hello there. The cute cat. Meow. This now brings us driver and constructor standings. Constructor standings, it seems like we're holding pace right now, but Mercedes is now 4 points behind Red Bull. So they're closing in hot.
Have you ever had a constructor win without one of their people winning the championship?
Yes, that's called a split championship. And most people, though, don't think about that because it's perceived that whoever wins the driver's championship is like the team that wins. Actually, the money for teams is not the driver's championship. It's the constructor's championship. That's where the money bonuses come in. And so Red Bull, of course, for their brand, knows that, yes, they could get money for the constructor's championship, but marketing-wise, being able to say Verstappen's a champion is going to get them more advertising dollars. Norris is back up to the 3rd position. Bottas, then Perez. Perez dropped down the order, of course, because of his terrible performance, but the team used Perez. How do you guys think about this? We're kind of bleeding into the race reaction. Perez is really good at managing his tires, should have been able to finish the race and pick up like 2 to 3 points, but they pitted him. You guys know why they pitted him so late in the race?
Yeah, because they want to take 1 point away from Hamilton.
Isn't that crazy? Red Bull would rather take away a point than to gain 3 constructors' points. How do you think about that, Paola?
I'm not surprised. I remember saying if Verstappen wins this race, I think there's an 80% chance he'll take the championship this year. And I think they were really pushing for that. We've seen Perez kind of happily fall into like the good wingman position. And so again, not surprised that he would comply readily with that kind of call. Not something that you really want to see
Yeah, I kind of agree because this goes back to our conversation about Bottas like every single week. If you want a wingman, force him onto a 1-year contract because anything you tell him to do, he pretty much has to do or he doesn't have a seat next season, right? Because you could always come back to, well, we told you this and you didn't listen and we're going to go with someone else. And so both Perez and Bottas are there to pick up constructors. And it dawned on me for the very first time, why do teams have 2 drivers? One, to win the Constructors' Championship, and one to win the Drivers' Championship. They don't need both fighting for the Drivers' Championship. They only need one. And Hamilton's winning it or Verstappen's winning it. And the other 2 guys are there to just pick up enough points to get the Constructors' title.
They didn't take into account Norris, did they?
Tell me more about that.
Well, Norris is getting higher points than both Bottas or Perez.
Yeah.
I guess he's not being the wingman. He's the top person on...
Exactly. And Ricciardo is 50 points. So it doesn't matter how high Norris gets up there. If Ricciardo had the same amount of points as Norris, though, that would be a different story right there. But Ferrari and McLaren have been neck and neck in this battle for 3rd place. Now, Paola, you said earlier you thought there was an 80% chance that Verstappen winning this race would go on to win the championship. Do you think that's why Hamilton was so avid and aggressive because it was his home Grand Prix and he knew he needed to stop the bleeding? It had been 5 races without a win. Verstappen won 4 out of those 5. He kind of needed to assert his dominance, you think?
I think so. Lewis in general, like, races his own race and he takes calculated risks. Can't say that he hasn't been this aggressive in the past because we've seen him make similar moves on other drivers like this. In terms of like the way that he reasoned it afterwards, I wouldn't go as far as what Christian Horner said to call it a desperate move. But I think they definitely were starting to feel that lead being taken away from them and it being a turning point if they didn't do something about it. So I don't think desperation is the word, but I think they were definitely wanting to close that gap.
You might say they had felt urgency to gamble, to take that shot, especially at their own Grand Prix.
But at the end of the day, though, Hamilton was in the stronger position. We've seen him punt other drivers off before because usually what happens is, unless you're Vettel, a front left to a rear right causes the guy in the front to have the problem, not the guy in the back. Vettel, he'll tap you and he'll spin. Speaking of spinning, Vettel was so good for so long and he spun out this race. How did you guys feel about the Spin Meister?
I didn't really realize he had that reputation.
Really? Okay. This goes back to Ferrari versus Hamilton. Hamilton and Vettel were going at it. They each did their desperation or urgency, like you said, Dad. They did their urgency differently. Vettel, his urgency resulted in him making contact and spinning. Hamilton's urgency often resulted in him winning. From that, some people started calling him Spin Bastion because Sebastian Vettel has this tendency, like Mazepin, to spin. The difference is Mazepin spins on his own. Vettel is usually getting close to wheel with another car, and it causes some oversteer or understeer. And so most people say Vettel is really good as a race driver if he's able to outqualify you and then outpace you. He's not a good wheel-to-wheel driver. Hamilton and Verstappen are able to go at it. That first half lap was amazing. Okay, we're already there. Let's get to the race reaction. How did you feel, Dad, about Verstappen's brakes being on fire going into that sprint race and then showing up Hamilton by passing him out?
Yeah, that was cool. I thought, wow, because last time I saw some brakes smoking, it was Hamilton, and then he went off the track. He couldn't. Versus Verstappen, he somehow was able to warm up his tires and his brakes, and he was able to get a good jump start and finish the sprint race and get first in qualifying, which then led to this whole thing with Hamilton and Hamilton putting his car where he thought he came alongside. But when I watched the replays, he never got where he said he thought he got, in my opinion. And Verstappen's going to have to be careful that this might happen again. But knowing Verstappen, I wouldn't be surprised if he's going to come back and do something similar and say, hey, I'm not going to back down either.
Yes, and that's what the commentator said, is that Verstappen all season has winning these engagements. Now, Hamilton hasn't crashed because of it, because Hamilton's smart, but this time, Verstappen tried to take the apex of the line, the tires collided, and man, that was a terrible, terrible punt, and it sent Verstappen to the hospital.
What it actually made me think of was that on Thursday, when they revealed the 2022 car, they were saying that they're hoping to have more wheel-to-wheel action, that we want everyone to be in a more equal, level playing field. I remember thinking, I was like, well, this is what we can expect for next year. Then
You get a
Maybe-
penalty, and you get a penalty, and you're going to crash, and you're going to crash.
Yeah, I immediately thought of that. I'm like, if everyone is racing wheel to wheel next year and they don't have a ton of experience doing that, we're probably going to see a lot more crashes. Hopefully not.
True. But this is the amazing thing. Those of you listening aren't aware of this. One of the reasons why Hamilton had to get the penalty is because he missed his apex. Verstappen left him enough room, but he had a little bit of oversteer. His wheel moved a little bit, and so he missed the apex, which is why he was too far to the left when Verstappen went right. But why this is important is because these cars are designed to not have good ground effect for cornering. This was something that was developed in the decades past. It was eventually banned because the cars were just going really fast, and they didn't have the safety measures to allow those cars to go that fast around corners. So starting next season, with the side pods now having ground effect, maybe like you said, there's more wheel to wheel, but because you stick to the road so much better, Hamilton would be able to hold that apex. And then that would allow him and Verstappen to actually continue that fight. So I'm hoping that with the better sticking to the ground, it's one thing if you're on a straight and they pass him. That's okay, that's passing. It's great when you're wheel to wheel going around multiple corners with the idea that you can take a different line than another driver and come alongside and potentially pass. So like, for example, Hamilton, when he was chasing Verstappen was having to take a narrow approach into the corner to cover him off. And Hamilton, because he was able to go wider, was able to get to speed faster in his traction. And that's why he was able to catch up to Verstappen on the straight. So like you said, hopefully we don't have all this crashing.
Yeah. I think what I'm getting at is hopefully this doesn't encourage like the Perez mentality of I made one little mistake and now I'm just gonna let everything run loose and ruin everyone's race.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's a mentality. That's the person, the way they think. So I don't think getting a different person a different car is going to change their mentality.
I think it could if they feel that they have more traction, if they have more control, then it might make them more risky.
Well, okay, I like what you said about being risky and stuff, because two drivers that I usually like to have on my fantasy team is Norris and Sainz. Sainz and Norris don't usually get into scraps with other people. You'll notice that. Now, Russell did come in contact with Sainz, and Russell ended up getting a 3 grid place penalty at the end of the sprint qualifying. But normally, Norris and Sainz will give you the room and will attack. Alonso, when was the last time you heard Alonso in a wreck? Alonso, not only in this race weekend, he was passing people on lap 1. He knows where to pass you and how to make it stick. And so I think there are some drivers, like you said, Dad, that have a mentality or at least a driving approach. As much as it pains me to say, Hamilton is not a clean racer. You go back all the way back to when he entered Formula One, and he's always had a driver, and with the exception of Bottas, he's always had a teammate that will be able to match him in pace when they're on race day, and they have to go wheel to wheel. And many of those ended up with some sort of contact. One of the most famous races is the 2011 Canadian Grand Prix. It was the longest race on record. Jenson Button for McLaren ended up winning it, but some don't remember that Jenson Button and Hamilton crashed each other that race, and it created a puncture for Jenson Button. He had the pit, and Hamilton messed up his race. And then you have Nico Rosberg versus Hamilton. They crashed each other out. They were punting each other on the Austrian Grand Prix and stuff like that. So Hamilton will go for it, but often he doesn't get the bad end of it. I think that's why he's able to scare people away. Did you see how Leclerc reacted at the end of the race? Hamilton did the exact same thing to Leclerc that he did to Verstappen, except Leclerc was like, I'm not going to have any of that. And then he lost control when he went off the track. He went doo-doo, and then Hamilton just blew through that corner at Copse. So Hamilton, I think he's calculated. He's wise enough. He's not going to crash his car, but he'll punch you off. And that's where you got to be careful if you're racing against him.
Yeah, but I don't think Verstappen's going to let this happen very much in the future.
Now, Paola, you said outside of the Hamilton Verstappen drama, that you thought that this race weekend was perhaps your favorite for the whole race calendar so far. Unpack that for us.
Absolutely. I'm a really big fan of the sprint race. I think for a fan, you want to be able to see the drivers go all out, not be worrying necessarily about the pit stop strategy or conserving their tires as much, just fully focused, going as fast as they can. And I really enjoyed that on Saturday. Seeing Alonso like the first lap, like past like I think it was like 11th to 5th in just a couple of laps. Like that was crazy. Seeing Russell like qualify really well, a car that we know it's not going to perform as well during race day, but you can see them extract a lot of the car on shorter race like that. That was really good too. And I got to see Ferrari doing well again, or at least Leclerc.
Dad, what do you think about sprint race in this race weekend?
I enjoyed the idea of it. I think for the Red Bull, it didn't work out so well. Even though Verstappen got first place from that, Perez started from the pit row. And so had it been the regular race and it wasn't a sprint race, I think he would have done better in the real race, Perez anyways.
Now, a part of the drama of this race weekend was that man that you mentioned, Ferrari, Leclerc, improving every single race and leading all but I think 2 laps at the end. How did you feel about Leclerc's performance and the sadness of Hamilton catching him and passing him like he did?
It was a slow death. You saw it coming like 10 laps out. The second, because it was early on, it was first like 15, 20 laps in where he started having those engine cuts, and you just knew like right away, this isn't sustainable. And if it's not going to be Hamilton, it's going to be Bottas, but he's going to get passed. Just really unfortunate. I mean, I think this was the race that he could, maybe the only race that he had a chance to get first place at. So to have that in a way taken away from him, not from any fault of his own, was just really painful.
I was just impressed that he stayed ahead of Bottas. Typically, you think Mercedes has a faster car than Ferrari, but Bottas never caught up with him.
Well, the last thing we're going to say about the whole Hamilton versus Verstappen thing is the effect I think it had on the psyche of people watching. If you have Verstappen on your fantasy team, I think you were invested all season for him to do well. So that means, and I saw this on Reddit, people were just upset because he, of all races, this was the race that you needed the mega driver him on. This was the race where he was going to get you max points to catch up to people who did him at Monaco with the mega driver. And then to see Hamilton just send him off the track. And then the penalty being only 10 seconds and pretty much allowed Hamilton to get the victory regardless of sending his closest rival in speed, but also championship, who sent Verstappen's car to the graveyard and the driver to the hospital. And then he's able to just still win. Like you said, Dad, if you can't beat him, punt him. It seems like that is telling Hamilton at 10 seconds, that's not a big enough penalty. I'm fine. I've got a faster car than everybody else on the field. Perez can't beat him. Bottas can't beat him. Leclerc can't beat him. Only Verstappen. That's a rough. And so you have all these people who are just upset because Hamilton didn't just win a race. He ruined your fantasy league. He ruined your fantasy team strategy for the race weekend. And it wasn't because Verstappen made a mistake. It's because of a racing incident where a driver knocked the other one off the road. Paola, talk about how you got spared from having to use your mega driver and feeling sad like everyone else.
So I got really lucky either by my own negligence or some kind of glitch, but I was certain that I had put Verstappen as my mega driver on Thursday, and I woke up on Friday to see that I had not, and the lineups had already been locked up. And at the time I was livid. I was upset. I thought I'd lost my chance to get highest scoring week ever. And then obviously race day happened and I was beyond relieved. Yeah. And I was just glad I was not in the bucket of people that just had to suffer tremendous loss. And I can still use my next week.
You have 1 week left before the reset. It's now time for Heroes and Zeros. Dad, your hero.
Ricardo's my hero. I think he's getting better with knowing his car, and he did well with me in this race, and I look forward to him doing even better the second half of the season. And I might end up having to pick him up on my fantasy team or McLaren and afford another higher driver.
First time that both McLarens have been in the top 5 in a very long time. Paola, your hero.
Leclerc, really happy to see him get strong enough pace to do what he did on Sunday. He held off as long as he could. One of the reasons he's my favorite driver is that he seems to race his own race. He's very level-headed, just showed great consistency, and he didn't get discouraged or make a dumb mistake when he started having those issues with the engines. I just think it shows what he's capable of if he's given the chance. So it's great.
Which brings me to my hero, Stroll. Quiet. I don't think I heard much about him at all, but he made a bunch of overtakes over this weekend. Got a decent haul of points. Hats off to Stroll. On the flip side, though, I'd have to say my zero is Vettel. He did really good, like Alonso, in the sprint race, and then spun out during the race. So I felt very bad for him that all that momentum and all that stuff that he gained, he then immediately lost during the race. Now, Paola, who is your zero?
Loser for this week is Paris. I think it was a bad week for him overall. He spun out in the sprint race and obviously didn't do so well during race day either. Personally, I'm not a big fan of putting team over personal pride for just 1 point. So definitely not the kind of person I want on my team.
You don't want Perez bragging that he got the fastest lap on the race.
Wow.
He did something.
Did something, but a whole lot of nothing.
But it's the motivation behind it.
Look, he didn't do fastest lap because he was being a marvelous driver. He got fastest lap because everyone else was trying to finish the race and they put on a softs or something like that. Sent him out there for a couple laps.
Well, at least he can say he did one thing better than Hamilton.
Okay. I guess to be fair, that is true. Dad, who's your zero?
It's Russell. Qualifying so well, you want to root for the guy. Because of the sprint, he did give some good points, but I was hoping that he'd finish better in the race.
That's a good point.
Disappointed.
Do not be deceived by him getting 16 points because of the sprint qualifying protecting him from all the positions lost. Because here's the thing, if you qualify outside the top 10 and you lose positions, it's only 1 point per position lost. If you're within the top 10 and you lose positions, it's negative 2 points for every position lost. So Russell is qualifying good the last 2 races in a row, but you do have to be careful moving into next week when he's not going to have the sprint race to cushion his fall. My hope, and pretty much everybody else who wants Russell to succeed, is hoping that one of these days he's just going to stay in the top 10. It's now time for It's in the Numbers. Let's review the results from last week. It was a pretty tricky one, but Dad, tell us, how did it all go down?
Yeah, shout out to Tristan. He gave a good explanation of what the 7X and the 8X would be. So he put 75 and 85. The Grand Prix at Silverstone those 2 years did not finish the full schedule amount of laps, which I thought was quite great. What we were looking for was actually 7 races in a row that had different winners from 1971 through 1983. And then again in 2003 to 2010, where you had runs of different winners.
Yes, and to clarify, not every season was racing at Silverstone as the British Grand Prix between 1971 and 83, but the 7 times that they did race there, like Dad said, no repeat winners. And so that's what we're going for. It may have been a little vague, but you guys wanted difficult. We give that shout out to Tristan. He's been our faithful It's in the Numbers code cracker. Today, our new It's in the Numbers. Read it off for us, Dad.
Number 7, 6, 5, and 10. And name the driver. The hint is it's the British Grand Prix is decreasing better.
And so that is our It's in the Numbers. If you would like to work it out and you think you've got the answer, just put a comment below what you believe the driver's name is, but also the explanation. And if you're right, we could feature you on the next podcast. Now time to review our one race challenge, or as we affectionately call the ORC. We had 45 entrants this last race weekend, and I want to tell you guys how amazing that is. Do you realize that if we get a minimum of 50 entrants, we could then be potentially eligible for the large leagues? Now, we do have an amazing large league average. We're sitting second in the globe, and the last 2 races have been a little bit difficult. We have not been performing in the top 5, but that's because of some craziness that's happening. But the number 1 leaders, F1 Fantasy Tracker, they are number 1 globally, and they also haven't been in the top 5 the last 2 races. So it goes to show, even if you got a great community, live sports sometimes has unexpected results. And actually, let me promo it while we're here. The Hungary GP, 4 have already entered. Once we have 10, I can make the custom banner and avatar graphics. Find that link in the description below. Back to this race. There are 2 things that you keep in mind for rules. Number 1, Mega Driver. If you use it, we do not take the full points. We will divide that by 3 and take your base. This way, we don't get whoever wins each week by whoever decides the Mega Driver. And 2, if there's a tie on points, lowest team value will break that tie. Now, that tie is specifically for if you're going to get on the podium in the ceremony that's played at the end of this race reaction podcast. This race weekend, we actually had no ties. Number 1 was Max MD Drama, but as you can see here, when we click on him, he Mega Drivered Verstappen. And when you remove that out of the equation, he actually drops to 2nd place. 3rd place was Mario. He also made a driver. When you take that out, he would then be dropped to 3rd place. So our top step on the podium was actually All the King's Horses by Stuart G. You will notice on this team there is no mega driver, and he got 285 points because he combined Hamilton and Bottas, Turbo Norris. But imagine if he had mega drivered Hamilton as an available option, he would have gotten a huge amount of points on the global stage. How do you guys feel about the play by the South African to be able to get on the top step, the podium, this race?
I think he must have had some pretty good insight of using the Mercedes at that Grand Prix and relying on the Hamilton, even though he costs more, to make up the difference.
Get this, the team value is 103.8. And he was able to afford both Hamilton and Bottas. That's probably because of how cheap Norris is. Then McLaren, they were cheap, but they performed really well. And so this is my theory. Britain has usually been dominated by Mercedes. That was a good decision to not have either of the Red Bull drivers on his team, which is against the meta, which goes to show that you do not have to have the 5 same drivers every single race, and you could get ahead of other individuals.
But the problem is, most of us, if we have those set 5 that we've used before, the only way of getting the drivers and the entrants that he had was to use a wild card and pick those up. Well, I guess you can substitute 3 drivers if you know exactly what you want. You're not day trading.
Let's just, for hypothetical, he had Raikkonen, Norris, and Schumacher on his team last race. Those are solid choices, right? Well, then that means his 3 free trades would have been Bottas, Hamilton, and McLaren. And it shows here that actually he has 0 subs used. So that means he actually kept this team for the previous week. And this just happened to be the week that paid off. That also goes to show that sometimes you may not have the best team every week, but when it counts for the ORC Elite, you get the dub. So hats off to you. Because there's no ties on the first 3 positions on the podium, there is no Fat Stacks Award, but there is a Meme Team Award. And we have to give it to Lando's Intolerant. Like, that is just hilarious. Thank you for brightening our day up when we first read it. This is our ORC leaderboard. You'll find the link in the description below to our Google spreadsheet. And this keeps track of how people are performing in our one race challenges. As you scroll to the right, you can see anytime there's a green bold, that's because they got the fast stacks. Anytime you have someone with green with white letters, it shows that they were able to beat the ORC Elite. The ORC Elite for this race was 324 points. Our ORC Elite means $100 million or less team value. And this team with Hamilton, Leclerc, Tsunoda, Russell, Ferrari, and then turboing Norris got so many points. What are you guys' reactions to the ORC Elite for this last race?
I think they're pretty handsome looking guys. Too bad they weren't on my team, of Norris.
I wanted to pick up Leclerc, but couldn't afford him, so I had to go with Sainz. What I could have done was drop Perez and pick up Leclerc, and I'm still thinking about that.
I'm wondering what drove him to pick Tsunoda. He hasn't been the most consistent.
Well, for the ORC Elite, this is our post-race algorithm. And so Tsunoda got 17 points and was cheap enough to be able to afford Hamilton and Leclerc on the same team. So I think that's where Tsunoda comes in to play. He got a decent amount of points, and that was because of his overtakes. He actually finished the race ahead of Gasly. No one talked about that, but that goes to show that Tsunoda did a good race when he's beating Gasly. Back to our ORC leaderboard. Gia, who is in 2nd place in 3 races, has got a gold, a silver, and a bronze. He is now 58 points behind Dad, who's at 73. And Dad, like he had to admit a couple weeks ago, it's going to be harder and harder for him to get on the podium because of the diminished value of his team compared to the powerhouse that Gia has. But Dad, you still hold on there. You're doing pretty good. You're setting the bar, and you've set it high.
A shout out to Gia. I mean, he's doing a great job. He did day trading at the beginning. He deserves to get on the podium some. I just hope that I can join him sometime later this year and keep it interesting.
And there we have it. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's podcast. It's been amazing to see you guys all joining a part of the pit crew. We have some exciting things in store in the future. Thank you again, Dad, for joining us this evening. And thank you, Paola, for joining us. And until next time, we'll see you on the pit wall.